It all started when I visited a paranormal night where a paranormal expert was giving a demonstration on different types of paranormal activity, from ghost hunting to seances gone wrong to voodoo dolls. I introduced myself to the woman afterwards, praising her for hosting such a great night. She told me she was going to visit the Bridge of Lucifer she was talking about and asked me did I want to go and check it out with her. She was telling me, like what she said earlier, there has to be 3 women, or else, if there were only 2, then the women would feel angry and very, very afraid. It would not happen if there was 1 or 3 or any more. It would only happen to 2 women together. The reason for it is because the bridge is meant to be possessed by the goat-headed boy. The woman told me that if I'd like to bring along a friend, then she will show me the bridge, and not to worry, as there will be 3 of us there. The background story was a boy was bullied years ago and fell by accident over the bridge. The boy was bullied by 2 girls, so anytime there are 2 girls on the bridge or 2 women, they feel angry because of the boy's spirit messing with them. A few days later, me and my friend and the lady were approaching the bridge. Before I stepped more onto it, I asked the lady, was she sure it was safe us walking onto the bridge? She said, of course, it's perfectly fine. There are 3 females on the bridge, not 2. If you were here without me, then yes, ye would feel the anger and fear. I suddenly felt strange. I had a weird feeling to attack the paranormal host, and looking at my friend, I knew she felt the same. Was this the anger if there was only 2 of us? I asked the host, does it affect men? The host said, no, it only affects 1 man. I asked, what do you mean? Then the woman pulled off a wig and said angrily, because I am the 1 man who is affected by my son's death, and I am the 1 man who will be able to summon his spirit by throwing ye off that bridge. With that, he was about to push us off when the man was blown back and a little boy appeared and said, stop, they're not the ones who killed me. Me and my friend got up on our 2 feet and ran as fast as we could, and when we felt safe, we rang the police. The man who was posing as the paranormal female host was arrested, and we heard later the story he told us was true, and after researching it online, I read lots of different stories that women felt angry and scared whenever there were 2 together. I was thankful the spirit of the little boy saved us, and felt sorry for his tormented soul stuck out there on that bridge that is called Bridge of Lucifer. Everything changed one night when I was bored and I decided to look through the attic to see could I find anything cool. I came across a really big box of old comics, and one that really caught my eye was a comic called Weird Tales from 1928. It had a weird looking octopus monster called Kulalu, who was created by a writer called H.P. Lovecraft. I went downstairs into my bedroom and couldn't stop reading. It was so exciting and so interesting. It was like the comic was written just for me. I found it so awesome. Suddenly I heard a bang, and I didn't know where it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from under my bed. I froze with fear, as the comic I was reading was spooky enough, besides an unexplained noise coming from under my bed. I was afraid to look, but knew that I had to, as I would be even more frightened if I didn't. When I looked, I fell with fright, with what looked like a giant octopus jumping out from under my bed. I screamed, then suddenly I woke up. I was grateful. It was all a nightmare. But I couldn't understand. How did I dream about something that I never read or heard about? I researched Kulalu and weird tales on my laptop, and the comic did exist. I wonder, how did I dream of something I can't even remember hearing of? I kept asking myself that question. I was relieved it was just a dream, but it bugged me. How did I dream of something that did exist, but I can't ever remember hearing it? Anyway, I was glad I was okay, and just tried to look on the bright side. It was all a dream. I realised it was dinner time already, and heard someone shouting at me. It was my mom calling me for dinner. She was just back from work. I sat down at the kitchen table and asked Mom, "What's for dinner?" She said to me, "I got into a mad mood today and decided to try something new. I bet you couldn't guess." I said, "No, Mum, what is it?" She said, "Octopusy." I froze in fear, thinking of the octopusy-like creature in the comic Kulalu. Then I saw a book lying on the kitchen table, and the author was H.P. Lovecraft. I looked back at my mom, and her eyes turned red. Mike was a host of a very popular nighttime chat show called The Nightline. He had a lot of controversial topics discussed and strange callers. But one night in November, he had the most controversial call ever, which he could have never guessed before taking it, that it would change his whole life. He was chatting about marriages and couples divorcing, etc. One caller who called himself Kevin rang just a few minutes before the show was about to end and was speaking about his wife arguing with him over and over, and he asked Mike for advice on what he should do. Mike was put on the spot, especially as it was so near the end of the show, but he decided to go with telling the caller to go with his instincts. Mike meant if he felt like getting separated or divorced, then go with his instincts. But as soon as Mike said it, a few seconds later, there was a loud sound of a gunshot in the distance. A few seconds later, there were police sirens. A gunshot in this city at night would cause a scene, so he knew it was definitely a gunshot after he heard the sirens. The thought crossed his mind, could it be Kevin the caller shot his wife when he had told him to trust his instincts? Was he some sort of lunatic who took his words for gospel and trusted his instincts even though it was to kill his wife in cold blood? He hoped that wasn't the case. A few minutes later, Mike exited the building, and there was a man that seemed to be soaked standing outside, as if he was waiting for someone. The man asked Mike for a light. Mike took out his light and offered it to the man, but the man said, "Could you light it, please? I've a problem at the moment with my arm." Mike said, "Sure," and lit the man's cigarette. Suddenly Mike jumped back as the man burst into flames and said, "My name is Kevin." He looked into Mike's eyes as he was burning to death right in front of him. Mike was stunned, shocked, knowing that it had to be Kevin, the caller, who had just called him a few minutes ago. Within seconds, a police siren was heard, and they pulled up to Mike and the burning man. A cop jumped out and held the gun at Mike and shouted, "Stop! You're under arrest. Put your hands in the air where I can see them. You have the right to remain silent." The cop's voice was tuned out after that, as Mike was in a daze, knowing he was being arrested for the man's murder, and blamed himself for the man murdering his wife. Me and my friend were enjoying our weekend in my new house, which my mom and dad told me was my great-grandmother's house. It was an awesome house which reminded me of houses you'd see in those cool mystery movies, big and mysterious. But since we moved in, which was just over a month ago, my mom and dad told me not to go into a certain room downstairs. The door was locked, but I knew my dad kept the key in his drawer, as I saw him put it there last week. We entered the room and nothing looked out of place. It was just an empty room apart from a chair and a closet with stuffed birds on top of it. I then stood on the chair and picked up one of the birds. Suddenly, a woman who we never laid eyes on before started shouting at us. I wondered who was this crazy woman and what was she doing in our house. We both ran out of the room and locked the door, and I rang my dad right away, explaining what had just happened. He got mad at me when he came home, saying he told us to not ever go into that room. Then he asked me what the lady looked like. When I explained to him, me and my friend felt shivers up our spine when he had said we just described his great-grandmother. A few minutes later, he showed us an old black and white photograph of her. This woman was dead for over 50 years. The next day in school, we were in nature class, and my teacher said, "Well, class, today I have a very special guest to tell us all about birds." Me and my friend felt like we couldn't move with fear when we saw the lady who entered the room was my great-grandmother. Suddenly, everyone else in the class seemed to vanish into thin air, and it was just me and my friend and my great-grandmother. The classroom window smashed and loads of birds started flying around the room. Me and my friend screamed and ran home. When I got home and explained what happened in school, things got even weirder when my dad told us today was Saturday and there was no school. He then showed me a journal he had kept from my great-grandmother. It said, "My father was arguing with my mother again, and I am crying now because he shot my pet birds. The only thing I had to keep me sane in this crazy house." I then suddenly felt sorry for my great-grandmother and realised she wasn't dangerous after all. She was just a lost soul in this world that got angry at anyone interfering with the birds in her room. So now I am not afraid of my great-grandmother. I look at her stuffed birds and pray that in the other world she will soon find peace. And now I don't look at her as a crazy woman. I look at her as what I call her, the bird lady. My friend was visiting my house, and I was just popping out of the living room into the kitchen to make some coffee. While I was making the coffee, I heard my friend talking, but just put it down to him talking on the phone. But when I walked back into the living room, he told me he just met my younger sister and he was speaking to her. I felt a shiver go up my spine and couldn't understand what he meant. I asked him, "Who were you speaking to?" He pointed at a photo of me and my sister. He could see I felt agitated and wasn't acting right. He asked me was I okay. I didn't know how to explain that my sister died last year, and she was my only sister. Now I know that I'm not paranoid when I think I hear her playing the violin at night.